So now departing to the last part that we're going to cover in chapter 3 here. Actually, not true. Last part of chapter 3.3 rather, is to talk about our simultaneous shifts. So again, we're going to label this P. We're going to label this Q. We're going to have a downward sloping demand curve. We'll have a upward sloping supply curve. We're going to label that initial equilibrium. So when things are changing one at a time, it's pretty straightforward. When we have simultaneous shifts, when both the supply and the demand move at the same time, it gets a little bit more complicated, and spoiler alert, it becomes a little bit more ambiguous. So the more things happening in the model, the less we can actually predict. So let's go ahead and go back to our electric car example, or sorry, gas cars. Actually, let's do electric cars. Electric? Why can't I spell that today? Wonderful. I'm losing my mind. All right, so we're going to be told that one, there's going to be that same kind of like bad press for electric vehicles. Aha, that's how we fix it. We just get rid of this, and then we just go EV. Boom. So if we have some bad press for electric vehicles, and then the second one is if there is an increase in the subsidies for electric vehicles. So the bad press for electric vehicles, right? So some of you answered this before. So the bad press for electric vehicles is going to influence the tastes and preferences. And since our market is electric vehicles, it's going to shift our demand curve to the left because there's going to be a decline in the tastes and preferences for electric vehicles. So that is the first part, right? We have a demand shift that's going to be downwards or leftwards, whatever you want to think about it, however you want to think about it. And then we have an increase in the subsidies for electric vehicles. An increase in subsidies acts the opposite that an increase in tax would be, right? So an increase in subsidy would be effectively the same as a decrease in our tax. And so this increase in subsidy is going to shift our supply curve, and it's going to shift it outwards. And so increase in subsidy is going to result in something like this. So now we have a peculiar situation where the decrease in demand resulted in our price going down, but then, so a decrease in demand results in our price going from here to here, right? Results in our price going down. A decrease in supply, or sorry, an increase in supply is also going to result in our price going down, right? The price is going to go down from here to here. And so it does make sense that when we combine the decrease in demand with that decrease in supply, we end up with a double impact on our price to this new equilibrium point down here. So that one makes sense because a decline in demand decreases price, an increase in supply also decreases price. So it would make sense that putting them both together is going to have a above and beyond each one of those individual shifts, decrease in price. Now, what's interesting is what happens to quantity, right? So as the demand decreases, quantity is going to go from this point to this point. So quantity is going to decrease when our demand decreases. But now let's look at what happens to quantity when we have a supply shift. Quantity goes from this point to this point, quantity increases. And so the way that I drew it here, right, I drew it such that the shifts were about the same exact size. The shift of supply is about the same exact size in the demand. And I did this for a particular reason. I did this because right now, it looks as if the quantity is exactly what it was when we first started, right? It looks as if the equilibrium quantity has remained unchanged. This is a misdirection of the graph. So the reason why I do it like this is because it should kind of set off an alarm in your head that, oh, when we're doing a double shift, one of the movements, right, either the price or the quantity, is going to be ambiguous. So I drew it like this so that it seems like it's going to be exactly the same, to set off an alarm in your head that really makes you realize that a demand decrease and a supply increase is going to result in a decrease in a price, but then it's going to result in an ambiguous change to my quantity. So we don't know what's going to happen to quantity. Now, why? Why don't we know what's happening to quantity? Well, let's go ahead and say that this demand shift was all the way over here. So if this is our demand shift, then now when we draw, if we were to take this graph literally, we would end up showing a decrease in our quantity if we had a more significant demand shift. Similarly, right, if we were to increase the supply shift such that it was out here, now we're going to end up with this amount of quantity, right? So the way that we've drawn it is that when the way that we draw things is the defining reason why we're saying they increase, decrease, or stay the same, it's a big red flag that actually what's happening is we don't know. The decrease in demand is negatively impacting quantity. The increase in supply is positively impacting quantity. And so they're going to kind of cancel each other out. We don't know how big each one is. And so we don't know which one is overwhelming the other one. So if I were to tell you, if I specifically said there's a very tiny supply shift, if that was in the prompt that there's a very tiny supply shift, then we could say, if I explicitly told you something like, supply shifts less than demand shifts. So if I were to say this, then we could draw it like this, and we could make an inference about the new equilibrium quantity and say, because of the fact that the supply shift outwards wasn't enough to overcome the impact that the demand shrinkage had on equilibrium quantity, we can model it and say that the equilibrium quantity has decreased. So unless it's specifically said in the prompt that the size of one shift is larger or smaller than the other one, we have to just assume that it's this situation that I drew at the beginning, where we have no idea what happens to the quantity, but we do know for sure that the price decreases. So questions on simultaneous shifts. I know some people were looking very lost, and they were looking around, but then they were also checking their cell phone. So, you get it? Are you getting it or are you not? You getting it? Okay.